美国现在需要的是改变自己的形象，而不是推广自己的所谓民主。
But we welcome stiff competition, and we will always stand up for our principles, for our people, and for our friends.
We knew that the Biden administration was going to walk straight into a trap when it decided to hold talks with China. A landmine that would blow up in its face. But what we did not know was that it would be so dramatic and so disastrous. What is happening in Alaska right now, on the USA's very own soil, is shameful for the US and its allies. The whole world misses Trump today. He would have never let this happen. Anyone who stood with the US against China has been left red-faced. Oh dear, Joe Biden. What are we going to do now? Hi, and welcome to TFI Global, the foreign affairs and geopolitical analysis arm of the TFI Media Group. I am your host, Shubhangi, and in this video, we shall discuss the ongoing foreign policy disaster in Alaska right now. In the frosty region of Alaska, things turned quite hot to handle as the confused Biden administration floundered around in shortage of words while a Chinese delegation thrashed the living daylights out of them. TFI had only a day ago explained how Joe Biden was walking into a landmine by holding talks with China. As it now turns out, the landmine has exploded right in the current president's face. What was witnessed during the Alaska dialogues between the US and China was a disaster for the Biden administration, which could have very well been averted. However, Joe Biden stood there and let himself be embarrassed by China. And one cannot help but say that we miss Trump. Trump would have never let China walk all over the US like this. Clips from the talks between the two sides have now flooded social media, and the US can be seen being thrashed left, right, and center by Chinese representatives Yang Jiechi and Wang Yi. A meek US delegation watched on as the communists charged at them with unusually long monologues. What's worse, the Biden administration seems to have taken to responding to Chinese aggression after the talks are done and dusted. Unlike former President Trump, whose very body language and rhetoric was sufficient enough to scare China off, and who was personified in his administration's representation of the US, Joe Biden has naturally been perceived as a weak and feeble head of state with an equally meek administration. Make no mistake, the first tranche of talks between the US and China have proven to be a disaster for the former, which not until very long ago under the Trump administration had the paper dragon by the neck. This time around, however, thanks to the Biden administration, China grabbed the US by its collar and blasted it during the representatives' unending monologues. To be fair, Secretary of State Antony Blinken did try to up the ante against his Chinese counterparts. However, he was too polite, soft-worded, and lenient in doing so. In fact, he seemed apologetic. The absence of strong and stinging words when speaking about issues like Taiwan, Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and the Indo-Pacific at large served as a cue for the Chinese to thrash their American counterparts. And that they did. When National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan tried to corner China for undertaking a quote-unquote assault on basic freedoms, but diluted the same with a rider like, "We do not seek conflict, but we welcome stiff competition," the Chinese realized that they were up against a defeatist Biden administration. So, Yang responded angrily by demanding that the US stop pushing its own version of democracy at a time when it is itself embroiled in domestic discontent. He also accused the US of failing to deal with its own human rights problems and took issue with what he said was quote-unquote condescension from Blinken, Sullivan, and other US officials. Yang Jiechi scolded the United States even in turn for its own dismal state of democracy, saying, "We believe that it is important for the United States to change its own image and to stop advancing its own democracy in the rest of the world. Many people within the United States actually have little confidence in the democracy of the United States." He even dared to add, "There is no way to strangle China." Caught by surprise with the unprecedented aggression being mounted by China, US representatives, particularly Antony Blinken, were seen going hysterical with their body language as they simply could not contain their inherent fear of China. The Chinese side categorically stated that their country will not be handled by the US from a position of strength, even as he took a sarcastic jibe at America, saying, "We do not believe in invading through the use of force or to topple other regimes or to massacre the people of other countries." Essentially, the American side made a fool of itself in front of the Chinese by appearing to be following Trump's anti-China activism in letter, but not having the dedication to follow through it in spirit. That is all China needed to obliterate the Biden administration, as it visibly did. Would it have been imaginable that under Donald Trump, China would, in the words of the State Department itself, dare to, quote-unquote, have arrived intent on grandstanding, focused on public theatrics and dramatics over substance? Absolutely not, because Trump would simply not take any of China's fake and unwarranted virtue signaling. Yet Biden did, and the same will now have global repercussions. America's allies and friends have got the message. America is not back. Instead, it is being scolded around by China now. Nations which have been fence-sitters all this while when it comes to China will now be convinced to not outrage the paper dragon. For if it can blast the United States of America, what would it possibly do to smaller countries in the ASEAN and the Indo-Pacific region as a whole? Even among America's allies, the proposition of talking to China and registering their place in its good books will now be stronger than ever, because, rest assured, the US is simply incapable of protecting its interests for the next 4 years at least. Joe Biden most definitely had a choice. He could have worked upon the foundations of anti-China activism laid out by Donald Trump. Instead, he chose to prostrate before the paper dragon, which is now burning the United States with fire from its mouth. Joe Biden has fallen into a trap. Here on, if he continues going soft on China, despite being publicly thrashed by it, it will effectively be an admission that he is a compromised president. And if he chooses to take on China, well, the standards of Donald Trump are simply too high to accomplish. Mind you, Biden would have to do even more than Trump did to China in order to tame it, as anything less would simply be dismissed by the CCP as inconsequential. Simply put, Trump has left behind a really high benchmark, and Biden is simply unable to match it. China is taking full advantage of this, and the days ahead could be really bad for the US and its allies.